Hi everyone, and welcome to my channel where I talk about movies. And today I'm going to go back to 1962, and this is The Trial. And it is written and directed by Orson Welles, who also appears in the film as the advocate, and Anthony Perkins playing Joseph K., adopted from the very famous novel by Franz Kafka. Which was written in 1914, published after his death in 1920, and I believe in the U.S. 1925 was its original publication in the United States in an English language version. It's a book that has turned out to be one of the most influential and studied novels of the 20th century. The human condition, as Kafka saw it. And Joseph K., played by Anthony Perkins, is a bank employee. He's actually kind of lower management, but he's on the way up. He's sort of like the right-hand man in the bank that he works in. He is an important part of this bank. He's a single man. He wakes up one morning in his boarding house and expecting breakfast from his landlady. But instead of that, 3 police officers open the door, come in, and they tell him that he has been charged with a crime and that he's under arrest. What crime? As Joseph K. says, what could I have possibly done to be charged with a crime? That's not for these police officers to tell him. He has no memory of committing any crime. But he doesn't go to jail. They don't incarcerate him. He's just being informed, and he's going to be interrogated. So the book is really, and the movie is really about the process of preparing for a trial, trying to uncover what it is exactly that Joseph K. is being charged with, seeking help, a lawyer, consulting with friends, consulting with people that supposedly have influence with the court and with the magistrates. Now, I have read the book before, and where is this book? Sorry to get too close to the camera there. And this is the book by Franz Kafka, The Trial. And I had read the book before. In fact, Goodreads said I read it in 2016. I thought it was much longer ago than that. And I was going to read the book before I watched the movie, which is my normal procedure, but I just couldn't work up the energy, and so I just watched the movie. But then as soon as the movie was over, and I've seen this movie quite a few times through the years, but not for a while, I had to read the book. So as soon as the movie was over, I sat down and I started reading the book. And I was just astonished in reading Kafka's Trial that just about everything that is in the movie, and there's some really bizarre things in the movie, what comes from the book. This is one of the most faithful adaptations I have ever seen of a movie. And there's only like one scene, I think, in the whole movie, and now Wells did change some of the chapters around, but then the trial was left unfinished, and Max Brod, who was Kafka's literary executor and was supposed to burn all these books and all his stories because he was not hardly published at all in his own lifetime. The trial was never published. Perhaps the parable that's in the trial, I think that was published. But he disregarded it after Kafka died of consumption at a very young age. There's one episode, so Wells changes some of the order of the episodes, but there's one episode that's not mentioned in the commentary that Wells does add, and it's a fairly significant episode where a woman with a brace on her leg is pulling a huge trunk across a desolate field with these crazy, I think this was filmed in Zagreb, and then I think that was Yugoslavia with these Soviet-era apartment complexes, very much sort of Wells's kind of Samuel Beckett kind of scene, where Perkins is trying to help and she refuses help in and pulling this trunk, but every other of these episodes that you would think, boy, this is so bizarre. This had to be Welles. This couldn't be Kafka, but it is Kafka. And Welles said that Welles was criticized for this his interpretation of Kafka, and some of that he deflected by saying, well, Kafka wrote this in 1914, and since then in 1962 it was only 20 years, less than 20 years before the Holocaust became known, where people were arrested for no reason whatsoever and but incarcerated and then put to death. So in some ways, Kafka is anticipating what is to come and the awful events of the 20th century. But I think a lot of the criticism goes to the interpretation that Tony Perkins has of Joseph K. He remains defiant. At least this is what we hear in the supplements. Welles wants him to be defiant because of the Holocaust. You're not going meekly to whatever your fate is. You have to fight against it. And this is set in 1962. I mean, the clothes and everything. This is not a costume drama back to the days of 1914. It's really sort of a timeless kind of feel to it. And place-wise as well. It could be anywhere. But Welles also sees Joseph K. as part of the bureaucracy. He's a man on the move. He wants to get ahead. He's mostly upset that this arrest and this criminal charge is going to hinder his rise through the very bureaucracy that he is now fighting, because he can't get anywhere in finding out what he's been charged with. It's kind of a faceless. It's kind of a faceless bureaucracy, and there is a parable at the end of the book, and Joseph K. and the advocate discuss what does this parable mean. Now, Welles foreshadows this in the opening. We get the parable in full with some great artwork. And like the book, you can read this parable in many different ways. So this is not a book where you where you know exactly what the author is telling you. And the other criticism of the movie in Perkins's performance is that we have no sympathy for Joseph K. This is the plight of the human being. Shouldn't we feel sympathetic towards his plight? And Perkins was the movie, according to Welles, got very good reviews both in Europe and in the United States, but everybody seemed to not like Perkins's performance. And Perkins, according to Welles, Perkins told Welles, this is the way you want me to play it. I mean, the audience isn't going to like it. He knew. But this is very much Welles's Brechtian approach. He had worked, I think he originally was going to be the director of Brecht's big Hollywood theatrical event of Galileo, which was eventually directed by Joseph Losey. So we don't have sympathy for Joseph K. Do we have sympathy for him in the book? I didn't see it there either. In fact, I saw this bureaucracy, Joseph K. part of the bureaucracy in the book as well. But there's guilt. There's definitely guilt, paranoia, guilt. Orson Welles said I think to Henry Joglin in an interview that he knew that Perkins was homosexual, but he was closeted, and he thought that Perkins, he deliberately tried to incorporate that into Perkins's nervousness at being uncovered, his paranoia. So we get Welles's trademark, I guess you would call it visual gigantism. is. This is where I think the movie and the book separate, because Wells had this fantastic visual imagination. And the one scene I think that most people remember the most from this movie is the scene where Joseph K. goes to work. And they filmed the workplace in this giant empty warehouse in Zagreb. And I mean, there's typewriters and typewriter desks forever. And Wells wanted a couple hundred more. They didn't have the money for it. He put his own money into it to get the set even farther. This was sort of a tribute to King Vidor's The Crowd, but it also, of course, anybody who has ever seen The Apartment, when Jack Lemmon goes to his office to work, it's very similar. This is even bigger. And we have Joseph K., Anthony Perkins, sort of elevated above all these people typing furious away at their desk, and you see people moving back and forth throughout this gigantic set, moving to their work and so forth. And but they were going to film in Zagreb, but they didn't have any money. Wells was working for the Saukin family. They never had any money. The grandson, I guess, in another 15 years would hit pay dirt. He was the producer of the Superman movies, the Christopher Reeve Superman movies. But at this time, they barely could get by money-wise. So Wells found the Gare d'Orsay, a huge train station in Paris that only like 2 trains were coming into. It was set for demolition. It was basically abandoned, and he uses this train station. I mean, he couldn't have designed sets that are more vivid and more powerful. This is a great black and white movie, and I should have mentioned in the beginning, this is in 4K UHD, and this movie looks absolutely incredible. Visually flamboyant, baroque. This is not so much the book. To me, this was the difference, this visualization. So there is a claustrophobia in the book, claustrophobia of words, and we'd still have that claustrophobia in the movie, because these giant sets seem to they're closing in on Joseph K. And there's this incredible sequence where he goes upstairs to meet somebody who's supposed to help him, and these young girls are chasing him. There's a slew of them. And he goes into the guy's studio. He's actually a painter. And the girls are peering in through the slats in this sort of ramshackle studio. But then you see their eyes, all in the book. I thought, when I saw that, I said, this has got to be Wells. It's in the book. So, and Wells, Kafka thought his book was a comedy. He would read passages from the trial and just laugh to his friends and then laugh uproariously. And Wells thought he was making a comedy too. And there is comic moments for sure in this film, but this is a rather solemn film with solemn music, classical music from the 18th century, I believe. I didn't write down the piece of music, but it's absolutely beautiful. And he does use some jazz in a few sequences to kind of give the film, it's very effective. It gives the film a kind of timeless feel to it. In one of the supplements, Wells is interviewed, and he says something really interesting where he said that this is at a college, I think it was UCLA or Southern Cal, and it was all students of film. By 1980, that was a big thing. And he said that, the director, the writer gets too much emphasis. The actors, it's really all about the actors, the performances. So we have Wells looking pretty much like Orson Welles looked in real life, not heavily made up to look like somebody else. He plays the advocate, and he emerges, he's laying in bed, he's supposedly sick, cloud of smoke, as if he's satanic, coming down out of the depths. We have Akim Tamiroff, from a great friend of Wells, one of the great supporting players in movie history. He's sort of introduced in in a kind of nod to Touch of Evil, where he played Uncle Joe Grandy, and if you've ever seen the swinging light bulb in one of the scenes. And we have, and the other thing, this is a very erotic film, and Welles is not known for his eroticism. And again, the book is there. The book is erotic, and especially in the character of the nurse to the advocate. And in the film, she's played by Romy Schneider, and she's just absolutely spectacular in this film. Elsa Martinelli is in it. John Moreau is in it for very brief scenes in the beginning of the film. So this was a happy time for Welles. These producers left him alone. They let him do the movie. They shot the movie. They tried to support him with the money. Didn't always work. So he was happy. He had carte blanche. And editing is just a beautifully edited film. Now, I have to say that in Orson Welles' European films, I have a problem with the sound in the post-dubbing. The sound often strikes me as kind of hollow. The lip sync can be off. Even with Anthony Perkins, it's not, I probably look for it more than most people would, but I'm a great, kind of sort of lip sync. I can't stand it when the lip sync is off a little bit. But there's also one moment in this film where Anthony Perkins' mouth is not moving at all. He's sort of at an angle, but his mouth's not moving. And yet there's a line reading that Orson Welles liked a lot, but he couldn't find anything, any lip sync to match it to. And then the other thing with the sound that always bothers me in these Wellesian European movies is that he will himself dub a lot of the supporting actors. Now, the supporters of the film say, well, that's not so bad because he's the advocate, and here the advocate is everywhere, because this advocate is a very shady fellow that Welles is playing. But in the commentary, we learned that he did at least a dozen, and some of them are just so, he'll mimic some accent, and there's an old guy just has a couple lines. Welles was asked that in that Q&A at the college, why do you dub yourself? Well, I can't afford the actors. And I don't know why he does that, because he's got these great visuals in these European films, and the sound can, at least to my ears, can be pretty be a distraction. The film was received well, as I mentioned, except for the Anthony Perkins. I saw this film, it was 1967, I was a freshman in college, and we had this very ambitious European art film society that showed things like The Gospel According to St. Mark, A Diary of a Country Priest, Persona. It was quite an education. The trial was part of this, and I was not attuned. Remember, this is 1967, and we did not have access to these kind of movies. They were not shown on television. You had to go to a repertory theater. If you didn't live in a big city, you would not be had the opportunity to see these kind of movies. So I was dumbfounded. I hadn't even seen Citizen Kane at the time. Citizen Kane was never shown on television. It was not considered this great film yet. So I may be wrong there. I think in '62, Citizen Kane was Sight and Sound #1 film. '62 was the year, and it might have even been '52. But it was hard to see, is my point. And this sort of has for a long time, both I was not used to the European art film. The sound, even the first time I saw it, I couldn't pick up the dialogue. I remember that. Orson Welles has a tendency to mumble, and so even when my ears were perfect, I had difficulty picking up what Orson Welles said. Now, if you compare his European films, say with Touch of Evil, which was made for a big Hollywood studio with great technicians, the sound on Touch of Evil is great. So we get, so again, the 4K UHD, it's fantastic. You get, you also get a Blu-ray with this. You get a commentary with Joseph McBride, and this is fantastic. It's brand new, it's 2023, and Joseph McBride knew Orson Welles going back to his McBride's college days, interviewing him when Orson Welles was making The Other Side of the Wind between 1970 and 1975, which Joseph McBride helped to restore in 2018. That's currently playing on Netflix. McBride was in the film. He played the film critic in The Other Side of the Wind, and has written 3 or 4 books on Orson Welles, great books. So we get an actual academic, it's not, scholarly commentary from Criterion, a brand new one. Boy, that doesn't happen too often. There's also this Q&A that's really good. It was supposed to be part of a documentary that Welles was making on the trial. He wanted to make a documentary for each of his films. That didn't go anywhere, but he's really having a great time answering these questions. There's a Q&A, or a Q&A, it's really just a conversation between Jean Moreau and Welles at the Ritz in Paris. And when you get to see Welles, is about 30 minutes, Welles speaking in French throughout that interview. And in the pesky little fold-out, here is part of what can be described as the mounting claustrophobia and paranoia that Anthony Perkins, Joseph K. is experiencing. You also get a fold-out with a essay by Jonathan Lethem, the novelist and crime of the century. So he talks too about the different sensibilities, Welles and Kafka, 2 of the monumental artists of the 20th century. Okay, thanks a lot for everybody who managed to listen. I do appreciate it. Comments are welcome. Take care.